My name's Дейвид Бетц. I'm a professor in the War Studies Department at King's College London, which is the biggest and best war studies department in the world. I've been there for about 25 years now. My area of specialism is fundamentally contemporary strategy, contemporary military affairs. I've written on a wide range of things, but probably most pertinent to the discussion we're about to have, I've been particularly interested over many years in the topic of insurgency and counterinsurgency, which is essentially the study of how countries are torn apart from the inside and sometimes put back together. For the most part, that research has concerned internal wars in foreign countries, in hot, dusty places abroad, and not so much at home. But it began to occur to me, actually, going back as far as a decade ago, particularly heightening in the post-Brexit vote, parliamentary shenanigans. To subvert that vote, it particularly began to dawn on me that the conditions that we generally understood to be contributory to the emergence and the persistence of insurgency in other countries, of internal conflict in other countries, was more and more apparent in our own countries. In that case, particularly the quality that of a country that is particularly pertinent is the perception of legitimacy, which is a huge issue in the study of insurgency and counterinsurgency. And my feeling was that British governments, amongst other Western governments, were essentially doing things in a rather textbook manner that seemed designed to diminish their own perception of political legitimacy, and that was a dangerous thing for our societies. Nelson Mandela had a famous trial, early 1960s. He's charged by the apartheid regime with treason, I think, was what he was charged with. It doesn't matter particularly, but he explained why, what his line of thought was about forming the armed wing of the ANC and so on. And he said that essentially, at some point, given some sorts of grievances, you have to decide whether you surrender to the situation, to the status quo, because it can't be changed within the rules of the game, or you go beyond the law. Now, how you go beyond the law, there's an immense variation in how you might do that. You might do sabotage, i.e. property destruction. You might use physical violence, rioting are the types, or if you do, you might conduct physical attacks, but even then you might make calculations about whom you attack. Do you attack uniformed figures, or are you less precise? And moreover, we have countries now where, on account of things like the triumph of identity politics, primarily, people don't share the sense of pre-political loyalty which they once did, which is, I would suggest, the major contributory factor to the perception of illegitimacy and the perception that politics is no longer functioning as it ought to. Moreover, the problems are now so severe that the political system is unable to cure itself. Right. So if you want to change, in essence, we are now getting very close, both in Britain and many other countries, to a situation where people in fairly large numbers are beginning to feel that the problems are intolerable and urgent, and that they cannot be solved within the existing rules of the game. Mm-hmm. If we had to list factors in order, multiculturalism would be at the top, and if we were to put some kind of ranking on them, it's like 90. Moving to a multicultural post-national model is incredibly destructive to the way that most Western states have governed themselves since modern times, since late modernity anyway. And that's happened effectively in Europe, effectively in the last 30 years or so, at a absolutely historically frantic and unprecedented pace. And I say it's the biggest thing, and actually that shouldn't be all that controversial. I mean, Angela Merkel said the same thing in Germany. One could question her motives in saying it, but she said it over 10 years ago that multiculturalism was a disaster for Germany. 3-4 months later, David Cameron gives almost exactly the same speech, in which he said that multiculturalism results in ghettoized communities living basically in their silos, unable to. So, in short, multiculturalism is the killer app for destroying what has been the nation. You have to imagine a bell curve. You know what a bell curve looks like. And on one end, you have very heterogeneous societies. Mm-hmm. And on the other end, you have very homogeneous societies. At both of these ends, the potential for civil war is actually quite low. Very homogeneous societies have low potential for a civil war because, on account of the homogeneity of that society, they're relatively able to arrive at consensus decisions, even when they're quite painful. So, in times of economic decline or natural disaster or war or so on, if you have any of the kind of big pressures that might be felt by a given society, whether internal or external in origin, natural or artificial in origin, a highly homogeneous society is usually able to weather that because they could say, we need to pull together, right? We need to get through this. We're all in the same, what's the metaphor? We're all in the same boat, okay? Very heterogeneous societies are also relatively stable because it's very difficult for any one group to generate mass potential.
There's no power blocks. Mm-hmm.
So if you've got a country that is broken, say, into 20 groups, mm-hmm. each with 5% of the population, then it's very hard for any one or even most manageable coalitions to dominate all of mm-hmm. the others. Mm-hmm. So there's this paradox. Now, the most vulnerable state is at the top of that curve, where you are, where you have a formerly dominant majority, which is in fear of losing its status, and it's most dangerous in exactly the situation faced now in Britain and throughout Western Europe, which is the perception of the indigenous native populations of Europe that they are being displaced in their own homelands. So one of the chief kind of bulwarks against civil war clearly is wealth. Right? If you're a wealthy place, you've got lots of money, then you can afford to paper over a lot of cracks, right? A lot can be done. If you think of money as a lubricant, mm-hmm. as a kind of social lubricant, if you've got a lot of money, you can make things you can make things work.
Bearable,
or yeah, at least bearable. Anyway, you're right. They can function. And my suggestion, I'm not an economist, but I don't think it's an outlandish suggestion, is that as far as the financialization of the economy goes, most Western economies are at the end of the rope. We're just waiting for the hammer to drop, essentially. So the expectation of the ability of government to continue to paper over problems in society through essentially financial redistribution. It's not financial redistribution. They're creating money out of thin air. Mm-hmm. They're creating debt to appease existing problems, but they're going to run out. They're already running out of the ability to do that.
So, David, if we accept, and I'm inclined, unfortunately, to accept your hypothesis that the conditions are optimal, what is it an event that sparks a civil war? Is it a series of events? Could it be like a clip going viral on social media? I mean, if we look back at last summer where you had the horrific atrocity in Southport, is it something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the most common metaphor when talking about, employed when talking about this subject is that of tinder and a spark, right? Or sometimes of like a powder keg. And your question is like, what is the spark? And I'll try to, as best as one can, to answer what the spark is. But the important thing is not the spark. The important thing is the keg. The important thing is the tinder, right? The sparks are not a problem if you are not in a room full of gunpowder. Sparks are not a problem if you're not wearing, plastic petrol-soaked, clothing. You get my line of reasoning. Mm-hmm. And that's what I urge people to concentrate on, is what are the policies, what are the things that have contributed to the existence of all this tinder, all of that, okay, go back to my iceberg metaphor, all that like frustrated political energy in the system. That's the real problem. And that didn't come overnight. That took a long time to build. Right? And whether it was accidental or deliberate, the fact of the matter is there is a gigantic ball of political energy that is just building up. Okay, now the spark is just intrinsically unpredictable. If you think of the Arab Spring, lots of people might have predicted that, and many people did, that the Arab world was highly politically frustrated, socially, very fractured, lots of political, economic problems that were kind of building up over a long term. But no one was going to predict that the thing that would set it off was an Algerian fruit seller getting so frustrated with the local, basically licensing police that he poured petrol on himself and set himself on fire in a market. And so, yeah, because you just can't predict those low grade effects.